It was the kind of morning that stuck to your skin, wet, gray, the kind that made crows louder and church bells duller. The funeral was held in the same chapel where my father had married my mother, where I had once sung in the children's choir, and where no one had bothered to save me a seat today. I stood in the back, near the exit. Not because I planned to leave early, but because I knew I wasn't meant to be seen. My family, stiff suits, fake tears, sat up front. Not one turned around. People only remember what suits them. The truth rarely makes it to the podium. They buried him without asking if I wanted to speak. I had been the one sitting beside his hospital bed, adjusting his oxygen, making sure he had clean socks. Jeremy hadn't even called. Karen sent a text. 3 words. Hope you're okay. No, I wasn't okay, but I didn't plan to fall apart in front of people who thought grief could be timed like a eulogy. As I watched the casket lower, I kept hearing his voice in my head. A whisper from 2 days before he died. Check the house before they do. He didn't say why, just that funny thing about grief. It doesn't hit like a wave. It's a rusted key turning in a lock you thought was jammed forever. He used to say things no one else noticed. You see things they don't. That's your gift and your curse. Sometimes he'd say it while watching me peel apples in the kitchen, or when I fixed the leak under his sink while my siblings were vacationing in Cabo. I never asked for praise, but sometimes I'd wonder if he really saw the weight I carried. The errands, the sleepless nights, the way I bit my tongue every Thanksgiving when Jeremy talked about shouldering responsibility. Dad never said thank you, but he never had to. That whisper, though, it kept playing back. What did he want me to find? The reading of the will was scheduled for that afternoon. A tight room in a law office above a bakery, the kind that smells like cookies and burnt printer paper. Jeremy came in like he owned the air, Karen trailing behind him, chewing gum like it was a nervous tick. We all knew the drill. Jeremy would get the house, the company, the retirement accounts. Karen would probably cry and get jewelry. I'd nod, keep my mouth shut, and drive home. Only that's not what happened. The lawyer cleared his throat. There's an update to the will, dated 2 months prior to Mr. Gerald's passing. The air changed. Jeremy sat up straighter. My name was mentioned, alongside assets, not just keepsakes, the company shares, the house. What the hell is this? Jeremy barked. This wasn't the plan. I didn't flinch. I just stared at the lawyer while Jeremy's voice cracked. He was manipulated, Jeremy spat. He wasn't in his right mind. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Mr. Gerald was of sound mind. He had witnesses, signatures. A notary. Karen looked at me like I had committed treason. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. This wasn't revenge. This was what he wanted. Later that evening, I returned to the house, alone. The rain had slowed to a mist, the kind you don't see, but you feel on your lashes. The house smelled the same. Cedar, coffee, old books. Like he might walk down the hallway and ask what I wanted for dinner. I sat in his reading chair. Worn leather. Deep creases where he used to rest his elbows. I slid my hand beneath the cushion. Just like he once showed me when I was 5, hiding candy from Karen. There it was. A small brass key. I didn't rush. I poured a glass of water from the tap, walked slowly down the stairs to the basement. It hadn't changed. Dust on every beam, forgotten holiday boxes, old tools, and that scent of damp wood. Behind a stack of chairs and rusted fishing gear, I saw it. A wooden cabinet. Scratched. Locked. The key fit perfectly. Inside was a small lockbox, black and smooth. Taped to the top was a note in his handwriting. When they forget, you'll remember. Use this wisely. I didn't open it. Not yet. I sat on the cold floor, box in my lap. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from knowing that whatever was inside had been left only for me. Whatever was inside would change everything. I didn't sleep. That lockbox sat like a silent dare on the kitchen table all night, whispering to me without saying a word. By 2 a.m., I gave in. The basement was colder than I remembered. I brought down an old desk lamp and set it beside the box. Rain tapped the small window, steady and rhythmic, like a clock ticking down to something I wasn't ready for. The key turned with a soft click. Inside, no money, no jewelry, just old ledgers, two sealed letters, and a USB stick. One envelope had my name. The handwriting made my chest tighten. If they knew what I knew, they'd never forgive me. Or you. I unfolded each ledger, every page filled with notations, numbers, transactions that didn't make sense to someone like me, but felt wrong all the same. The USB held more: bank transfers, email chains, company records with Jeremy's name scrawled across them. 3 years before Dad ever got sick, Jeremy had been moving funds, big ones, shifting them out of the business, rerouting them through a side entity I'd never heard of. And somehow, Dad knew. The second letter was shorter, more urgent. They'll come after you for this. Be smarter than them. I printed everything, every file, every ledger page, until the printer coughed out its last drop of ink. By sunrise, my hands were stained with toner, and my stomach was tight with dread. I hadn't slept, but I didn't feel tired. I felt hunted. Mid-morning, I walked into town to buy more ink. On the way, I ran into Donna, an old family friend, one of Dad's longtime neighbors. She reached for my arm. "Marcy, I heard from Linda at the courthouse. Jeremy's already talking to lawyers. He's saying your dad wasn't thinking clearly when he rewrote that will." I didn't react. Not outwardly, but something inside me cracked like ice under weight. Back at the house, taped to the front door, was an envelope, heavy stock, legal lettering. Inside, a formal contestation of the will, Jeremy's legal team. "Given recent confusion surrounding our father's mental fitness," it read, "we are compelled to protect family assets from potential manipulation." They were accusing me. Just like that, I wasn't the daughter who sat bedside for months. I was the threat. I didn't even take off my coat. I just stood in the entryway, holding that letter like it might dissolve in my hands. The living room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, and suddenly, even that felt hostile. I waited until dusk before I sat back down in Dad's reading chair. The ledgers were still spread out across the table. I flipped through them again. On one page, scrawled in the margin, was a note I hadn't seen before. You always knew who kept things afloat." That hit me harder than the rest. I remembered Jeremy's first year in charge, the unnecessary layoffs. The weekend trips billed as strategy retreats. The way he talked over people in meetings, chest puffed like a rooster. I remembered coming home from one of those meetings and finding Dad sitting on the porch, smoking a cigarette he swore he'd quit. "You see things they don't," he had told me. I used to think he meant that as comfort. Maybe it was a warning. I sat with my doubts for a long time that night, long enough for the house to go quiet in a different kind of way. I wondered, what if this wasn't enough? What if the ledgers and the emails and the USB stick weren't proof, just noise? But then I heard Dad again. Not his voice, exactly. Just the way he used to say things, half in jest, half gospel. "Don't throw the first punch. But if they hit you, make sure they don't swing again." I nodded to the empty room. "All right, Dad. I hear you." By Saturday afternoon, the mail brought a certified letter from the family's accountant. Same man who used to give me butterscotch candies from a glass jar while Dad signed year-end documents. I opened it with hands already bracing for the blow. It was a single-page warning. Polite, measured, but final. "The company books have been seized for audit. All inquiries are now subject to legal review." There it was. Someone else was watching now. And they weren't on my side. The rain hadn't stopped. Maybe it wouldn't for a while. I pulled into Dad's driveway just past 8 with a lukewarm coffee in one hand and yesterday's dread still settling in my chest. The air hung heavy, same as the sky, and the house looked smaller now, like even it was shrinking away from everything it had to hold. I let myself in. The scent of old books, cedar, and something faintly metallic greeted me again. I walked straight to the basement. There was no curiosity left, only obligation. Answers don't wait forever. Halfway down the steps, I heard it. A dull thud. Not loud, not urgent, just enough to pull my attention to the back corner near the bookshelves. It was probably nothing, but my life hadn't had nothing moments lately. I moved the shelf. One of the wall panels sat crooked, barely clipped into place. I slid it aside. Behind it, buried in drywall dust and rust, was a small square wall safe, not one of those digital ones, no keypad, just a keyhole. I knew the key. It had been in Dad's chair the day I opened the lockbox. I hesitated before inserting it. There was something final about turning a key into the unknown. The safe door creaked open, exposing 3 thick, dust-covered folders and one sealed envelope with my initial on it. For M. Only. I sat right there on the basement floor, cross-legged, back against the concrete wall. My fingers were shaking, but I opened the envelope first. A photograph. Jeremy and Uncle Daniel, side by side, grinning like old friends in front of the company's first office. Behind it, a signed and notarized document, 20 years old, transferring partial ownership of the company to Daniel. None of us were ever told. I rifled through the rest. Records of loans against the company, signed 5 years ago, massive amounts. Dad had never mentioned this. No one had. But the signatures were all there. Jeremy's, Daniel's, even one from the bank president who used to come to our holiday dinners. Then a handwritten note, short but sharp. This is their mess, but they'll use your silence to survive. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the corners of the paper curled from how tight I was gripping it. They didn't just cut me out. They kept me busy doing damage control, all while hiding the rot underneath. I scanned the documents, every page, and stored the originals in a waterproof bag. Then I drove home, locked them in my own safe. That night, I didn't sleep at my place either. The next morning, I reached out to Frank. He was a former warehouse manager, pushed out during one of Jeremy's efficiency sweeps. We met at the diner near the lumber yard, the kind of place where no one asks questions, and the eggs are always a little too greasy. Frank stirred his coffee 3 times before speaking. Your dad was worn down. I don't think he saw how deep it ran until it swallowed him. I asked him if he knew anything about the loans or the offshore accounts. He didn't blink. Jeremy used company cards to float personal deals, bought into some tech nonsense out in Austin, used the company books to hide it until things started caving in. And my dad let him? Frank shook his head. No, but by the time he found out, it was too late. If he'd fired Jeremy, it would have triggered the loan clauses. Everything could have collapsed. His words sank in, slow and acidic. Frank stood to leave, but before he did, he dropped his napkin on the table, leaned in, and said, If you think loyalty buys you anything in this family, you weren't raised in the same house I was. That hit harder than I expected. On the drive home, I replayed holidays where I served food while the men talked money, birthday parties where I paid for the cake but wasn't mentioned in the toast. Every moment I thought I was doing the right thing by keeping peace. Turns out, I was just making it easier for them to hide things under my name. When I got back, the mail was waiting, a large envelope, certified. My name printed too neatly across the front. Subpoena. Jeremy was fast-tracking the hearing date. Inside, mixed in with the legal paperwork, was a document from the safe I hadn't looked closely at yet. One of the last pages had a signature line I hadn't noticed. My name, listed as co-signer on an offshore account I'd never seen in my life. I stared at it, my signature. Except, it wasn't mine. I wasn't just caught in their storm anymore. I was now part of the crime, at least on paper. Jeremy showed up 12 minutes late. Same booth we used to cram into with Dad after school events. Back when everything was simple, before ledgers and subpoenas and fake signatures turned family into strategy. I didn't offer small talk. I just slid a manila folder across the table toward him. He didn't touch it, just looked at me like I was a stranger who'd sat down at the wrong table. Then that smug half-smile crept in, like he was already drafting a counter. Copies of the offshore documents, I said, and the original ownership transfer to Daniel. His eyes didn't even flicker. I'm not threatening you, Jeremy. I'm warning you. If this gets to court, it won't be about who wins. It'll be about who survives the fallout. He leaned back, arms crossed, tone casual, like we were talking about baseball. You wouldn't burn down the house you were born in. I didn't blink. Watch me. He laughed under his breath, then finally opened the folder. I watched the muscles in his jaw tighten, not from shock, from calculation. Where'd you find this? He asked. Doesn't matter. I have more. His smirk returned like armor. You've always been dramatic, Marcy. But this is just sad. I didn't respond. There was no point. I stood up, dropped the check on the table even though I'd barely touched my coffee, and walked out without looking back. I drove around for an hour. No music, no destination. Just let the silence swallow the noise he'd stirred up in me. I thought I'd feel powerful confronting him. I didn't. I felt scraped raw. That night, I sat in the living room, lights dim, flipping through old company newsletters. My name wasn't in a single one. But Jeremy? He was everywhere. I thought about all the times I'd tried to bring up concerns. Quietly, respectfully, always waiting for the right time. Spoiler, there never was one. I remembered sitting at the edge of conference tables while Jeremy spoke over me, rewriting my emails to soften the tone, rehearsing meetings like an actress begging for a bigger role in a play she helped build. And that one time, God, it stung. I asked to present quarterly HR updates to the board, and Jeremy told me, in front of 2 junior managers, Marcy, let's not bore the room with fluff. Real decisions are made elsewhere. I laughed it off back then, called it business as usual. Now I know better. That night, I called Victoria. She answered on the first ring. I'm tired, I said, of pretending silence equals grace. It doesn't. It equals disappearing. There was a pause, then her voice, steady, fierce. Then stop fading out. Be visible, even if they flinch. The next morning, I woke up with that in my chest, a kind of electricity under the skin. Then I checked my email. Subject line, thought you should see this. No name, no signature, just a video attachment. I hesitated before clicking, then watched the footage play. It was me, 2 years ago, in the conference room, mid-meeting. My voice rising, tears welling, gripping the table like it was keeping me upright. I remembered that day. Jeremy had undercut me in front of the entire staff. I cracked, but this footage, it had been edited, cut tight. Just me unraveling, no sound from him, no provocation, just a shaky woman, losing it. I closed the laptop slowly, and just like that, the narrative shifted. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was now the liability. The cafe wasn't busy, but it felt loud in all the wrong ways. 2 days since the video leaked, and it was like my name had changed from Marcy to that woman who lost it. People didn't whisper. They just paused when I passed by. Eyes darted away like I carried a contagious sadness they didn't want to catch. I stood in line. The barista, normally chatty, avoided eye contact while ringing me up. An old neighbor I used to help with groceries gave me a nod that said, I don't want trouble. I carried my coffee like it might spill if I breathed too hard, sat in the back corner, and I read the comments. She should have never been in leadership. No wonder her brother stepped up. I always knew something was off with her. Too quiet. I closed the screen, looked out the window. You don't need to say something cruel when silence says it louder. Back in the car, I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, chest tight, eyes burning. And then it all came up. Years of holding back, of being the reasonable one, the composed one, the you go ahead, I'll stay and clean up one. I cried until I couldn't breathe right. Shoulders shaking, forehead pressed to the steering wheel. I hadn't cried like that since the day Dad died. And maybe not even then. Later that night, I got a message. No name. Just, I have something. You should see it. Attached was a phone number. I called. It was Paul Whitaker, my dad's old auditor. I hadn't seen him in at least 4 years. I didn't think you'd pick up, he said. But I hoped. He asked me to meet him that night. Off the record, he added. Bring no one. His office was in the back of a small insurance agency now. Dim lighting, smelled like dust and old tape. He didn't waste time, handed me a thumb drive. I was asked to destroy these about a year before Gerald passed, he said, but I didn't. I turned the drive in my hand. Why keep them? I asked. He gave a half smile. Because your father trusted you. That still means something to a few of us. On that drive, internal memos, time-stamped emails, draft edits of that video, including an exchange where Jeremy's personal attorney gave instructions on what clips to cut, what tone to highlight. Make her look unstable, not angry. Instability scares people. It worked. I looked up at Paul. Why now? Because the story's been rewritten, and you deserve the truth to fight it. I nodded. Thanks. Then paused. But trust is expensive these days. I'm broke. He didn't take offense. Just nodded, handed me a bottle of water, and left me alone in the office for a while. When I got home, I stayed at the kitchen table until after midnight. Files open, highlighter in hand. But it wasn't satisfying. It wasn't even hope. It was just weight. Each page another brick on a chest already heavy. I remembered 2 years ago when I nearly quit. After Jeremy talked over me at a board retreat for the 3rd time, I packed my things. Dad pulled me into his office. You're the soul of this place, he told me. It'll rot without you. I believed him. I stayed. But souls can't stop rot. Not when the termites wear suits and call it leadership. I wanted to talk to someone, but I didn't have the energy to explain. When Victoria called, I let it ring out. I couldn't wear another brave face for someone who meant well. I was at war, and no one saw it but me. Close to 2 a.m., I got up to lock the front door and noticed something on the floor. A plain white envelope. No name, no stamp. Inside, a single line. Keep digging, and you'll be the one buried. I held the paper without shaking. But my breath came sharp and shallow. This wasn't business anymore. It was personal. It always had been. The phone rang just after sunset. I was halfway through chopping onions for dinner, the smell clinging to my fingers. My lawyer's name lit up the screen. Marcy, we need to talk. Jeremy's filed a counterclaim in the custody hearing. I froze, knife still in hand. He's submitted the edited video, she continued, voice clipped. He's alleging emotional instability. We have to respond fast. The judge sees this. It could tilt everything. I didn't speak for a beat. My daughter was in the next room, humming quietly as she did her homework. Her pencil scratched softly against paper. She was innocent to all of it. He's not just after the company, I said, barely above a whisper. He's coming for my kid now. I hung up, washed my hands in silence. Then I stood at the kitchen sink staring out the window, street light flickering, cars humming past, and said it aloud to no one. You can call me unstable all you want. Just don't think I won't fight back. The next morning, I called Paul Whitaker and asked to meet. We sat in his office again. No lights, just blinds drawn and a dim desk lamp on. I handed him the threatening note. He read it, jaw tightening. You need to escalate, officially. I know. We made a plan. I connected my lawyer to Paul. She started assembling a formal complaint. Manipulation, financial fraud, digital defamation. I gave her everything. The memo trail, the time-stamped edits, and Paul's untouched copies of the original footage. This won't just defend you, she said. It'll turn the whole thing. I nodded, but I didn't smile. That night, after my daughter went to bed, I sat beside her and brushed her hair back gently. Just a little grown-up drama, I said, trying to sound light. I've got it handled. She looked up, serious. Are people being mean to you? I paused. Some are, but I'm okay. I kissed her forehead. Later, as I watched her sleep, I thought, I used to believe protecting her meant shielding her. Now I know it means standing up, where she can see me. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery. First time since Dad's funeral. I didn't bring flowers, just a folded napkin from that old diner we used to go to. I placed it on his headstone. You were wrong to let them walk over me, I said quietly. But I was wrong to think I needed your voice to use mine. I stood there a while. Then I turned, walked away. Silence isn't peace. It's consent. And I wasn't consenting anymore. That evening, just before sunrise, I sat with my attorney and signed the official complaint. It was real. Jeremy wouldn't be able to hide behind edited clips and smug smiles anymore. When I stepped out of her office, the air was crisp. A breeze pushed against my coat. Across the street, a black SUV sat idle, window rolled down. Jeremy leaned over, smirked like we were still kids in Dad's office, still playing at power. "You sure you want to do this?" I didn't answer. Some things speak louder when you say nothing. Monday came gray, the sky pulsing with drizzle as I slipped into a tailored blazer. I glanced out the car window and saw Seattle's skyline blurred behind rain. I straightened my posture and smoothed my hair. No fear, no hesitation. Today would be different. Paul was waiting at the family estate. He handed me a USB drive and a printed sheet. His digital expert had dug into Jeremy's submission. The manipulated clips were flagged. The metadata timestamps had been re-encoded. The editing software identifier didn't match any licensed version, and the original date stamps didn't align with the claimed meeting time. I stared at the printout. Jeremy wasn't clever. He was sloppy, and that would be his undoing. "You don't shout when you're holding the truth," I murmured. "You just let it land." The shareholders' meeting room was quiet, lined with old portraits of my father, framed in gold. The board members sat stiffly as Jeremy opened confidently. "We will vote today to consolidate full control under my leadership." I raised my hand. "May I present?" No one objected. I wheeled in my laptop, played the doctored clip. Jeremy's smiling face frozen. Then I showed the metadata overlay. Seconds, date stamps, software identifiers. Room went dead silent. No gasps, no protest. Just that kind of silence that feels too heavy to fill. One board member pushed her papers aside and walked out. Another shifted uncomfortably. Jeremy's expression turned rigid. I closed the laptop slowly and said, "You can still vote how you want, but now you know what you're voting for." Faces broke. Whispers started. Eyes darted at one another. I stood unflinching, even as pressure hit from every direction. Inside me, tension churned. I remembered that day in school, voice shaking during a speech, Dad sitting silent in the back. He believed silence made people stronger. I believed him once. Now I realized silence had just hidden my worth. Cousin Emily was seated near the back. She looked at me wide-eyed. After the meeting, she slipped me a folded note. "Thank you for not backing down." Her hands trembled as she handed it to me. I tucked it inside my blazer. I understood then. This was never just about me. It was about showing every unheard voice that you can walk into the same room that erased you and still stand tall. Late that evening, I reached for my phone. New email. Subject: "You think that was all?" Inside, one line. The basement wasn't his only secret. My pulse skidded. Someone else was watching. Someone deeper than Jeremy. The turning point had arrived, and I'd just stepped past it. Late into the night, I stood before Dad's locked cabinet, its solid wood surface cold under my palm. The house was quiet, everything settled into shadows. I traced the edges until I found a seam, a false panel. My heart thudded when it slid open, revealing a second ledger. Handwritten. Ink faded. Entries, initials, years of numbers spanning a decade. I lifted the folder. The entries were cryptic, some labeled silencer, others tied to initials I didn't yet know. One entry, dated just months before Gerald's death, read, "Final settlement." My breath caught. He knew more than he ever said, and he wrote it down in case someone needed to finish the job. I spread the ledger on my desk. Outside, drizzle tapped the window. Inside, urgency coiled in my chest. I cross-referenced the initials with corporate records and legal filings. One set matched Margaret's signature. Margaret, my mentor, someone I trusted. Betrayal stung. She had persuaded me to back off deals that would have exposed Jeremy's mismanagement. Now I realized she wasn't protecting me. She was protecting the legacy, the reputation, the silence. I forced myself to breathe. I remembered how Margaret visited Dad's hospital room, holding my hand, whispering comforting words. That hug now felt like manipulation. a soft blade hiding sharp betrayal. Not all knives are sharp. Some cut through trust before they ever touch the skin. I confronted Paul next. In his dim office, I laid the ledger before him. He studied it quietly. "Your father wasn't paranoid," he whispered. "He was trying to warn you." He confirmed several initials. People I once thought were loyal were listed among those who stood to gain. I considered confronting Margaret outright, but held back. She allowed only one surprise strike, and it would hurt more coming from silence. Instead, I called my lawyer, told her to prepare a revised strategy. We would not only defend, we would reveal systemic cover-ups, the manipulated board votes, the hidden payouts, the betrayal under trust's disguise. I drafted a list. Who stood with me when I whispered? Who had silenced me when I tried to speak? And who gained when I stayed small? Later that night, footsteps on the porch caught my attention. I opened the door. It was Emily, cousin Emily, pale, trembling. She extended an envelope. "I found this in Dad's drawer," she said. "I think you're in danger." Inside was a folder stamped in Dad's handwriting, evidence I hadn't yet uncovered, letters, notes, documents. She backed away. I closed the door, stunned. If the past had secrets, the present was building an ambush. Emily and I sat across from each other at the dining table, not saying a word. The envelope between us had already spilled open. Photographs, tape cassettes, printouts, all of it spread out like pieces of a puzzle someone didn't want solved. I picked up the photo first. Jeremy, plain as day, shaking hands with a man I recognized from news reports, a known fixer, someone who handled corporate cleanups. My stomach clenched. One of the printouts was an email thread, time-stamped and damning, plans to trigger legal collapse, divert my resources, and isolate me publicly. But it was the tape that broke the silence between us. I clicked play on an old handheld recorder. Jeremy's voice, cold, controlled. Margaret's, cautious. They spoke about me like I was a variable, not a person. "Keep her chasing smoke," Margaret said. "She'll tire out before she sees the fire." I wasn't paranoid. I was hunted. Sunlight had started crawling in through the kitchen window, hitting the pile of evidence like a quiet spotlight. I reached across the table and took Emily's hand. "You didn't have to bring this to me," I said softly. She blinked. "I did. You needed to know the whole truth." That same morning, I took the entire file to my lawyer. No more defense. It was time to strike back. "This," I said, sliding everything across the desk, "clears the board." We shifted the entire legal strategy, countersuit for malicious prosecution, corporate fraud, and targeted defamation. The new evidence wasn't just leverage, it was an executioner's axe. Later that week, I called a press conference. No grand podium, no flashy backdrop, just me, a microphone, and a simple statement. "I've fought quietly. I've been respectful. But when the attacks come for your child, your name, and your truth, silence becomes consent. I'm here to speak clearly. I am not backing down. I am not the villain." After the cameras cut, I drove to Jeremy's office. I didn't schedule it. I didn't need an invitation. He looked up from his desk as I walked in, more annoyed than surprised. "I brought something for you," I said, placing a sealed envelope on his desk. He didn't open it. "What's this?" "Closure," I said, "and a warning. I'm not here to beg. I'm here to bury." As I turned to leave, my memory pulled up a scene from long ago, Dad and I sitting over a chessboard. I was barely tall enough to see the pieces. He tapped the queen gently. "Sometimes it's not about the king," he'd told me. "It's about when the queen moves." Back at home, Emily handed me another envelope. "It was hidden in the attic," she whispered. Her hands were shaking. "Behind a photo." It was Dad's handwriting, faded, familiar. The ink pulled me back to him instantly. He wrote about regret, about not protecting me more, about knowing Jeremy and Margaret would twist the legacy for their own gain. He admitted he kept records, hoping I'd find them. He ended with words I never expected to need. "I didn't build this for wealth. I built it hoping you'd build something greater, with or without it." I sat down on the floor and cried. Not out of pain, not anymore, out of release. Dad, I whispered, holding the paper to my chest. I'm building it now, not just the company, me. Weeks passed. The court ruled in my favor, charges dismissed. Jeremy's firm issued a public apology, forced, bitter, but public nonetheless. Part of the company was returned to me, but I didn't go back. That place would never be home again. Instead, I used the money to start something new, a nonprofit legal aid center for women fighting wrongful corporate claims. We opened our doors in the same building where Mom used to teach piano. My daughter cut the ribbon with me. Paul stood to the side, hands in his pockets, nodding like a proud uncle who didn't need credit. As we wrapped up for the day, I recorded a short message for our first social media post. Sometimes, I said into the camera, loss isn't failure. It's just a lesson in what's worth fighting for. That night, long after the last staff member had left, I stayed behind to clean up. There was a package waiting by the door, no return address. Inside was a single envelope, sealed. It read, "He wasn't the only one.